Welcome back. I'm going to talk to you today about a technique that I first learned that is almost forgotten in this day and age. Texas ringworm. Up here in the North Country, weeds are a big deal, and you got to go to a Texas rig to pull through all the weeds. Technique doesn't work so well on the rocks, but when you got weeds present, it's definitely something that I use a lot, and it's forgotten. It's technically back in the day when I first started bass fishing. I learned how to Texas rig a worm. Berkley 7-inch power worm, still what I use to this day. But it's forgotten about, with drop shots, Ned heads, all these other techniques that a person can use, these really finesse ones. These real finesse techniques. Texas rigging a worm is still good, still catches big ones. It's just at my buddy's house the other day, and he's got like a 5-something pounder on the wall that died for one of our Minnetonka tournaments, and that's a Texas rigged worm, actually out on some rocks, but it's a pretty good technique, and I'm going to go over why, my setup, and some conditions and other things as to why I use this. So backstory, when I was 13, 14, 15, had some buddies from around here, and they learned from somebody how to Texas rig a worm. So that's what we did all the time. That's what we did for tournaments, that's what we threw on docks, that's what we did for everything. This is a long time ago in the 90s. It's what I learned how to do. It's what basically like a deadly thing here in Minnesota, keeps the weeds clean. I've used it forever, and it's crazy to me that people don't use it as much as I think it deserves, which I appreciate because we still catch fish on it. It's been around forever, still using it for pitching and flipping and other things, but Texas rigging a worm out on the weed lines here in Minnesota just does not get used a whole ton. One of the reasons that I use this is I can just cover ground. A lot of times fish will move on the weed lines, and a very fast way to try to relocate these fish without using a crankbait is just Texas rigging a worm. You can just start going down the weed line, try to catch up to the fish wherever they moved, and you get a bite, and then you can slow down. Then you can throw a drop shot and other things. But a lot of times there is a certain time period when fish do get up into the weeds, and a Texas rig is the best and easiest way to get to those fish is by throwing that Texas rig, because it comes through clean and you can get them. For instance, I guess I'll say this, our last tournament on Minnetonka in September, fish had been not really out deep for me, and we pulled up on a spot, and there's always been fish there, and we pulled up there, and my buddy bombs out Texas rig way out in the coontail, which is big thing for around here, is fishing up in the coontail, and he found a group. He got like 4 or 5 good ones, maybe like 3-pounders, maybe one was a little over 3 up in the coontail, and that's what this Texas rig technique is about. It's catching fish up in the weeds and to it, and you can cover ground. Some people, the old school, like, you just let it sit there. That's not the way I fish it. Pull it through the weeds, let it sit there, pull it through the weeds, pull it. You can cover some ground, and here's how I do that. I'm not a huge color person. I usually use a 7-inch Berkley, just a Berkley power worm. Same thing I did back in 1995, 94. So This one's Zoom, just a 7-inch one. My whole setup's for a 7-inch worm. If you go with the bigger worm, you need a bigger hook, bigger weight. If you go with the smaller worm, you'd need a smaller setup. But what I use is, to cover ground, I just use this little 1/8 ounce weight bullet head with this number 2 VMC hook, heavy duty, because I use it on a bait caster. So I just got this number 2 VMC hook offset. So it keeps it clean, so the hook point doesn't penetrate. That's why I got to use a little heavier setup, because you're using this offset hook. VMC 2-aught is about the same size as Gamakatsu 3-aught. Heavy duty, because the way I set the hook and the setup I'm using, you gotta have something bigger. But North Country, just going, this is a watermelon seed, going with something natural. You know, you use your watermelon seed, green pumpkin, motor oil, camo, black. If it's a darker water lake, you can use like a June bug. Water clarity is a big one. Those are just some of the staples. Not a huge color guy, so you're just using that worm 7-incher. And then I use a bait casting rod. I grew up using a spinning rod, but since then, to cover ground, in case you get a bigger fish, 3.5 to or bigger fish, I like to use a bait caster. This is just a 7-1 medium heavy St. Croix rod. It's got a little bit of a softer tip, not super soft because you really want to drive the hook hard. You know, I'd say it's a medium heavy 7-1. I usually want to use about a 7-foot rod, 7-foot medium heavy. 7.0 bait casting reel, so you can pick up line quickly. So it's a little bit heavier duty. You can probably get by with the 6.8, but I just don't. You're using shorter poles. You can move a lot more line with the 7-footer. You're taking more time in, or taking more line in. And so I usually just go with like a 14-pound fluoro or whatever kind of line you like. I've never really experimented with braid because I don't think I've had to, but that 14-pound, you can snap it through the weeds if you need to. Part of the reason being Texas rig and using the offset hook is that you can get it through the weeds. You can throw it right in coontail. You can throw it into milfoil, actually. My buddy goes with the smaller weight and goes a lot slower, but I usually like to move a lot more ground, and I'll throw a drop shot or something afterwards if I find some fish, jigworm, whatever the person wants. This is about covering water, being efficient. Super overlooked technique. It's so old school. Figured with Larry Nixon coming back to the Bassmasters, you got to talk about the old Texas rig worm. But super good technique. The amount of good fish that I've caught through the last almost 30 years, 25 years, 20 years that I've caught on just a regular old Texas rigged worm would astonish some people, because it still works. It lets you cover ground, and anywhere, any lake that you got weeds on, it's pretty deadly. I have some buddies that do use a Texas rigged beaver or whatever it is and drag it places on the rocks, but it does get hung up more. And you're fishing a little slower. I think there's better techniques to use. I think just in the weeds. The old Texas rigged worm, the setup I got, lets you cover ground, gives you a chance to find a group of fish. If that group of fish moves, you can start covering ground to figure out where they went to, because a lot of times weedline fish will move unless they're directly on something. But if it's a big enough group of fish, you just start. What I do is, you're like, that group of fish had to move somewhere, so you just start moving down a weed line. Maybe a corner, maybe a turn, but they'll move, for bases, pressure, whatever it is. So you can just start covering ground. I just use fairly short to long pulls, and then when you get a bite, you go back and set. That's the good thing. I don't give them a long time. It always amazes me watching all these people using the Carolina rig that they sit there and let them have it. As soon as I feel that fish, I go back and set the hook on them. But make sure you get a good hook set on them. But you're just covering little ground, and my pull would probably be from about 10 to noonish. And once you feel that bite, you can drop your rod back down and set the hook. You're using fluorocarbon. It's more of just a straight solid set. But definitely an overlooked technique. If you guys have any questions, you can always comment below. I can always make another video on some other, if anybody else has some questions. But definitely overlooked. And it's been around forever. So hope it helps. Good luck. And we'll see you next time.